So I don't know whose this is. I assume it's Ben's. But this is my friend John Ferber's systems biology chart of how complicated aging is, or just and the thing is that this chart of like all the things that happen during aging it's incredibly incomplete, and the truth is so much more complicated that you can't even visualize it. This just happens to be here. So what we're trying to do at Halcyon is to build tools that get control over understanding all of that, the reason that it's almost at this point, if you look at this, if you look at the sort of complexity of biological systems, and you're trying to understand how it all fits together, attempts to do that right now are they're limited by not just understanding, but also by data. There's so much that we don't that we can't actually see. So much information that we can't access and that we can't put together in the right way. And I probably should drink more coffee. No, okay, so who am I and why should anyone listen to anything I say? That's how it always begins. So so there's this system I was studying as a cancer geneticist guy, where the two, so a fly wing is just two layers of cells that have to come together in this incredibly complicated way to produce a flat wing with these veins in it of a certain size, with the two sheets of cells actually sticking to each other by the end of the whole process. And it's this incredibly sensitive process that you can intentionally mess up in all kinds of ways. Many different ways you can mutate the genome of a fly so that those two layers of cells don't actually come together at the right time, and you get a blister. And so you get a blister in the wing. So the fly comes out and it has wings that are like sopapillas, that are just these anywhere from like a little bubble in the wing to like the entire wing not being together at all. And it's just this big balloon coming off. And the reason we studied that system in Danny Brower's lab was that all the events and all the communication that happens between those layers of cells, it's the same machinery that gets perturbed in metastasis in cancer. And the general theme of metastasis in cancer is that in the evolution of an aggressive cancer that might eventually kill you, one of the gates it has to pass through is that on a cellular level, the cells have to sort of not care where they are or what other cells they're touching. So broadly, cancer is just cells not being sociable and not playing by the rules that builds this and keeps this regulated. So we studied this event where with very precise orchestration, a bunch of things have to happen just right for the wing to come out with the two layers of cells talking to each other and physically connected to each other. I spent about 3 years there hunting down mutations that affect that process. And around that time, I met Michael and William Andrade when I was a year or two into that work. And I heard about how they were going to sequence DNA, and it just seemed to me, I daydreamed about that problem a little bit without actually coming up with any good solutions. And it seemed like they had a solution that was definitive and scalable and would eventually completely solve the problem. The problem being, how do you read off the digital information that's in a genome that leads to building all the machines inside of a cell and leads to all the regulation and architecture of an organism. And at that time, I was hunting down mutations by literally just having flies have sex with each other and produce offspring, and you could tell what mutations got inherited by just looking at the flies. And there's a process called recombinant mapping, where multiple generations, you're comparing multiple generations and looking at phenotypic markers like the color of the eye or the way that the bristles are straight or crinkled, to figure out what genetic markers you've inherited. So you're mapping your way through the genome. Is kind of like something people have been doing for 90 years or more, or actually close to 100 years now. They've had an understanding that they could exchange units of heredity that they didn't actually understand on a molecular level until about the 50s. So recombinant mapping to hunt down mutations has been done for 100 years, and that's what I was actually doing in the early 2000s to hunt down mutations in Drosophila, and it was still somewhat cheaper and more convenient to have to have me doing that than using sequencing tools to just take an entire fly, crush it, and see everything you've done to mutate the genome. Now the context here is. The context here is how worthy of it is, how important is it just to determine exactly what goes on when two sheets of cells start talking to each other. But if you completely understand that sort of thing, you can extend that understanding to just about anything you can imagine in building an organism, say building a synthetic organism or changing the morphology of an organism, but there's a visionary road to walk down there that I'll try to get to. The whole point of that, like how any of this pertains to not dying, how any of it pertains to curing all diseases, and is it worth doing relative to approaches that are based on computation or on an emerging intelligence in silico. So kind of we're going to need to disambiguate like why. I mean transhumanists who are serious about developing technologies, they're sort of fighting that war in different major theaters, and the soft matter approach is the theater I'm working in. So, okay, to go back to your original question, it didn't seem to me worth it anymore to keep working in the trenches of cancer genetics research, because it's so difficult to get clear answers out and to get enough data out to really understand the system. So I worked for 3 years and I identified a dozen or so novel mutations involved in this process, but I hadn't achieved any real understanding. Those 3 years were just dedicated to very basically seeing what had happened to the genome rather than being able to test any hypotheses or get any clear answers about how these mutations were contributing to this phenotype that we were looking at, where we would get a ballooned wing rather than a flat wing. And but during that time, I knew Michael and William, and it started to be extremely obvious to me that they were working on the right thing, which is taking a fundamental approach, a tool-based approach, where if you create a tool that helps everybody move faster, you've had a much greater impact on the progress of medicine and the progress in our understanding of biology. So I left. I stopped working on that. And around the same time, I was also doing summer internship kind of work for Aubrey de Grey. I was working on the Lysosens project. And I was very proud of what I did there because John Schlondorn and I managed to find the first enzymes that we knew could break down one of the lysosens targets. In this case, A2E, this small molecule that builds up behind your eye and contributes to age-related macular degeneration. So we had that success. But even that sort of work. So I think SENS is very important, and that and Aubrey should. In a sane world, Aubrey would have $1 billion to spend on SENS, but we don't live in a sane world. And I want to see SENS happen. SENS is complementary to my approach to dealing with biological systems in a soft way. Okay, so Lysosens was a branch of the SENS project that focused on removing particular molecules that build up and aggregate as we age and that are likely to contribute to age-related pathologies. So SENS more broadly is about identifying damage on a molecular and cellular level and finding ways to remove that damage with specificity in order to with the broad idea that if you can restore on a cellular molecular level, if you can restore the non-damaged phenotype or the phenotype that doesn't have all this stuff that went awry as you got older, that if you could restore how it was originally without those molecular and cellular without the molecular and cellular damage that results with aging, that you could get rejuvenation. And in the Lysosens project we worked on, the lyso refers to the lysosome, which is supposed to be the stomach of cells, the thing that breaks everything down and hydrolyzes it and destroys it and gets rid of it, and so lysosomes are like these processing centers for junk, but they don't. It turns out there's a lot of stuff that they can't actually break down, and in many cases, the stuff builds up inside lysosomes until a cell just stops working, and so you just have this cell sitting there not working and sending out all kinds of unhappy signals to its neighbors, and there's that interconnects to all sorts of evidence of a contribution to cancer and to age-related degenerations of all kinds. And so at the Lysosens project, we set out, and there's not just the stuff building up in the lysosomes, but there's also these specific molecular things that happen to the proteins on the outsides of cells that link proteins together, and so you get all these random, but we know what a lot of them are on a precise level. These cross links between the architecture on the outside of cells, and they're not supposed to be there, or at least there's no regulation of them. So you end up with some of those assemblages are supposed to be elastic, they're supposed to be stretchy, and they're supposed to they're supposed to be compliant, like some of the extracellular matrix architecture around your arteries and your veins, like the stiffening of that with age, or even just the stiffening of your skin with age, relates to the buildup of these molecules specifically as we age. And the Lysosens project, we set out to find enzymes that could specifically target these molecular bad guys and remove them, remediate them from the human body. We found, we went after a lot of these targets, and our biggest success in the work we did at Biodesign with Professor Bruce Ripman was identifying two enzymes that could break down A2E, which contributes to age-related macular degeneration. It just builds up inside of a layer of cells behind your retina that's responsible for recycling, and so that recycling stops working, and that seems to be a major factor in age-related macular degeneration. But even that work on that level, I didn't really have a taste for it because I wanted better tools to be able to go after that sort of thing. And what we're doing at Halcyon will eventually feed back to that kind of research and help it to move faster. So we came up with this catchphrase: we're turning biology into an information science, which may sound kind of vague and fuzzy, but it kind of expresses what it is we're really doing. So you could so DNA, you know what DNA is, and you have a sense of the importance of DNA in this informational hierarchy that causes all life to do what all life does, on the level of nanoscale, of the nanoscale machinery of life. It's the code that leads to how all that stuff gets built and regulated. The more we understand it, the more we'll be able to intervene in that process, and change that process in good ways and interesting ways. And the tip of the iceberg there, the tip of the iceberg there is personalized medicine, on the scale of the next 10 to 15 years. So in 10, 15 years, you'll go to see a doctor, and you'll have something prescribed to you that is extremely tailored to your individual molecular makeup, as dictated by not only your genome but your entire metabolome, your proteome, your transcriptome, and not only that, but all the informational features that all the information about what's going on inside you on a molecular and cellular level that could affect whether or not you're going to die of cancer, or of whatever you've just been diagnosed with, or whatever the doctor might see coming 5 years away, because the doctor has enough information about you at that point to actually be able to predict it. So Lee Hood at the Institute for Systems Biology has this useful, very alliterative organizing concept. He calls it P4 medicine. So it's personalized, preventative, and I don't remember what the other two P's are, so maybe it's not that useful. But the big picture is, it's tailored to you. It's eventually predictive, meaning that it's not just medicine isn't just going to be, well, okay, so we have some evidence that just through DNA sequencing, 15 years ahead of time, you could see a circulating component of potentially metastatic cells that 15 years later would kill you. And so what personalized medicine will bring is that you're going to see those things coming. Anything that's kind of semi-predetermined because of strong factors, determining factors that we can pull out informationally from your genome and from other molecular diagnostics, you're going to have extremely long warning about those things that could go wrong and that could kill you. And at the same time that people start to have that really far out warning, they know they're going to get pancreatic cancer in 15 years. We're also going to be accelerating biomedical research to the point of, in that intervening 15 years, it's not going to remain static. You're going to have some chance, probably on a personal level, you're going to have some chance of of beating it with that 15-year head start, because it's not just going to be you, but it's going to be millions or maybe billions of other people who see all this stuff coming in 10, 15 years. And maybe now the response to some of that is, I don't want to know, because if I can't do anything about it, I don't want to know what's going to happen. And a lot of people have that psychological reservation about getting all this information about their biology, but that's going to change, because it's a chicken and egg problem, where enough people have to see it coming for the cures to for there really to be a drive toward cures on a research level. So for people who wouldn't want to know in 15 years that they're going to get Alzheimer's, or whatever the predictive value turns out to be, and the predictive value will become greater the more people are willing to do this, because we'll have better statistics. We'll have higher in our experimental study of populations. We'll have more data. It'll be stronger. It'll be more predictive. The more people do that, the more likely they are not to die, because better research will result from more people letting their medical records and their genomes be analyzed. But that's, like I said, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The substance of the iceberg is really the experiments that we'll be able to do when we can treat biology digitally, and for that I go back to Drosophila genetics and all those many hours sorting fruit flies and mating them, and having a capability to get a vast amount of precise molecular information from any system, whether it's a single E. coli cell in a dish, or it's a fly walking around on yeast, whatever it is, being able to extract that information and iterate and experiment, that drives the whole meme of turning biology into an information science, where the time I spent trolling around the Drosophila genome through this interface called Flybase, and just all the time I spent looking at the known molecular information about the genome overlaid with it, it reminded me of computer programming when I was a kid, and there was a strong association between those two, between the architecture of a computer and all that time spent looking at the genome, and being able to compute an organism, being able to like have an organism that's like an unfolding program, or like a program being executed. If you have both backgrounds, both computer and biology, it starts to feel like at some point the two will meet, and that's what we mean by turning biology into an information science, where we can program organisms, we can program ourselves, change our form, not just avoid death, not just avoid sickness and decline, but actually enhance our capabilities, make ourselves smarter, or make ourselves 9 feet tall with blue skin, if that's what we want to do. So so that would be about Halcyon Molecular, and how Halcyon was founded and what we've accomplished. So our founders, Michael and William Andrade, were the first two people on Earth to know that you could do something very fundamental with individual DNA molecules. And they learned how to pull individual high molecular weight DNA polymers into air and place them with nanometer precision. The whole point being to enable our approach to DNA sequencing. So they invented something called molecular threading, where they're pulling individual molecules into air out of solution, and they have precise geometrical control over the placement of the molecules. and it's also rapid and scalable. So we end up with these arrays of individual high molecular weight molecules with nanometer precise spacing between the strands, and the molecules are consistently stretched when they're placed down. The point being that we want to derive phase information from the strands where all we can really see are heavy atoms that have been added. So you see these heavy atoms in a line, and if the DNA is not straight, you can't figure out how those heavy atoms correspond to individual bases along the strands. And that was the problem that they solved to make electron microscopy-based DNA sequencing work efficiently. I specifically wanted to come to Asia because it's the future, and I hope I can see the singularity coming out of Asia as easily as Silicon Valley. Maybe it's more likely, actually. So, what else did you want to know about that?
So, how about some examples, like some concrete examples that lay people can sort of relate to about the effects of, or what this research will lead to, what this sort of development will lead to?
Oh, well, so okay, so this is not the polished corporate response. Would be a bunch of businessy speak about personalized medicine and standard of care, and that's all good and true, and it's going to be a part of your medical record, and it's probably going to save your life at some point. But the reason I'm doing it is that I think we can cure all diseases in 20 years, or 30 years, or 40 years. But the point is we can get to that day sooner, and it's not crazy to get there. And that's why I joined Halcyon, because I could see that happening on that sort of time scale where it's going to matter to you and to me and to her personally. And it wouldn't be bad if it were. It would be great if it were only for future generations too. I mean, I care about future generations, but we could do this in our lifetimes, as crazy as it sounds, and that's might be good if that were broadly accepted, because if people believed it when people from the scientific world say we could cure all diseases in 20 years, if people broadly believed that, they might demand it. And if they demand it, there's kind of another chicken and an egg problem where I'm afraid they might have to demand it for it actually to happen, because there's so much inertia in the world and so many misplaced priorities. So we can do it. That's the one thing I would want to say to I'd want to get enough lay people to believe that we could do it. And plenty of scientists would say that it's crazy and there's no way. And I guess we could have that debate. But they might agree with me that if it is crazy, it's crazy because of how the world works socially and not because of how difficult it is intrinsically. It's not crazy for scientific reasons. It's crazy because the world is crazy, and we're just not going to get people to like put as much effort into it as they would. Maybe just because they don't believe it would happen, or they have all these silly concerns. They're not silly concerns, they're just like things that you can think past in 5 seconds if you don't have a strong emotional bias toward believing them, like that overpopulation is a worse problem than aging. I kind of feel for Aubrey having to repeat the same things over and over and over again for the past 10 years just because the world hasn't gotten the message about how silly those objections are. You probably wanted something more concrete.
That's fine. No,
Okay.
This is great. Continue. This is really good.
Well, some of my ideas are not so formulated. It's just like strong intuitions from having been in the trenches of biology. If I knew exactly how we could cure all diseases in 20 years, I would just do it. But of course, I don't have a clue of what it will actually be like. I just have this sense that it can be done. It's not as if biology is going to be limitlessly complicated. There's already so many things we can do that seem surprisingly surprisingly tunable, surprisingly controllable. We're already starting to get so much control over biology, or at least we have a foothold over getting control over biology, a great foothold. And that foothold needs to be extended by a few orders of magnitude, maybe several orders of magnitude, but we could still conquer the whole terrain. I think once you conquer that informational terrain, then you can start iterating it, you can start hacking it, you can start playing with it until a real understanding emerges. So on one level, there's tons of raw data that you want to get, and you want to get it very precisely and cheaply and accurately. You don't want it to lie to you at all. But once you have that, concomitantly, okay, so we see this grand design, three major components on the path to turning biology into an information science. There's reading DNA, and that's the part we're working on directly. There's writing DNA, which a lot of people are working on, and hopefully we don't have to solve that problem at Halcyon, and others will solve that problem by the time we've solved reading. And then there's programming DNA, which is going to require both reading and writing to be very efficient processes, very cheap, accurate, efficient processes. And then we can start programming systems. People are already starting to program systems to some extent in a very crude fashion. So the International Genetically Engineered Machines Contest, I think that's what it's called, IGEN, at Hart, based, I think it's Drew Indy's thing, but you can look that up, where so BioBricks is one example of that, something that's starting to become distributed. Have you heard of BioBricks? So BioBricks is a very crude but promising beginning toward programming, where a number of components are sort of identified, and there's a registry of parts for things that you can put into single-celled microorganisms to get them to do certain things, and to get them, by certain things I mean you can have timed circuits. So you put the right genes and control systems and promoters and enhancers. So you put the right individual genetic components into an organism, and you get a bunch of them. So single-celled bacteria, E. coli, for instance, I think is just about the only thing they're using. And you can get colonies of E. coli to behave in predictable, programmed ways. So, for instance, you can get them to emit the smell of bananas when you add something to the medium. You can get them to do really basic logic, where you add two things and you get a certain result. But if you add a third component, you suppress that result. So you can kind of get logical circuitry behavior in a very rough fashion from single-celled organisms that are amenable to this sort of rough genetic manipulation. I think one team I heard about was working on a television, like a bacterial television. So you would get cassettes of genes that could be digitally turned on and off to change the color, to change the color within a particular pixel, being a bacterial colony, and get this plate of bacterial colonies to turn on and off in a television-like fashion. So these are all kind of that's the beginning of programming. So people are working on the beginning of programming. People are working on writing DNA and making that cheaper and more efficient. And we're working on the reading part, because the reading part is to us the most fundamental basis for all the other stuff. It's reading what's already out there, all the genomes in the world that are already out there. The whole biosphere is interesting for that, because everywhere you look, there's systems biology. There's some mystery of how something formed. Every leaf on every tree down there is slightly different genetically. Every cell is slightly genetically different. When reading DNA is cheap enough and fast enough and accurate enough, we're going to be able to get the full code of systems like trees and whales and carrots and humans and human brains and noses and coffee beans, and we're going to be able to. We need to be able to read all that off before we can presume to start writing it in an intelligent fashion or start programming it. But somewhere along the way, there's a leap where these things converge, and you're going to see people really meaningfully programming biology, which has dangers. I was talking to Jan Tallinn about that. He's quite concerned about some of the dangers. Maybe one of the biggest dangers is it could be a road to superintelligence if you could build brains. But we don't need to get into that. That is something I promised Jan I'm going to start taking more and more seriously, because you kind of talk from this driven, optimistic perspective of, wow, I can do all these things, but they're dangerous too. I mean, the bright side here is so bright, cure all diseases, have total control over our biology, that you have to remember that people with malicious intent could do some very bad things if we can do that, and we need to figure out how we're going to protect against that. Otherwise, we don't go down the road at all, and we accept the status quo and have to relinquish technology development, which seems rather impossible. So we're going to have to deal with it. Maximizing self-determination for the greatest number of sentient beings, and ending involuntary suffering.
So what do they mean?
Well, what do those things mean? Well, the first one is about freedom and the right of people to determine their own destiny, and supporting them in that and not getting in their way. So if you want to die of cancer, and you really, really, really want to die of cancer, I don't want to stop you. I might be sad if I like you that you're gonna, submit to dying of cancer, but really I can't fundamentally change your decision. And the other part is removing involuntary suffering from the world. That's kind of phrased broadly, because there are so many different types of suffering, and then there's voluntary suffering, which speaks to the self-determination aspect. And if people want to suffer, then let them. But it all kind of melts in this kind of haze of Zen Buddhist philosophical complexity at some level too. I mean, like, what is the self that seeks to determine itself? And are there really any selves, or are there just these aggregated communities of individual volitional centers in each of us? Are we just these populations I don't know. Does anyone actually have a coherent self? I'm kind of open to the possibility that we don't, and that maybe we end up in a hive mind, or which would scare the hell out of a lot of people. So, what do you think of a hive mind?
I like the idea. I mean, in a sense, you can consider societies as hive minds. I mean, we've developed as social creatures,
Yeah.
and we've developed in packs. So I can consider, that would be in a sense, like a low bandwidth hive mind.
Yeah.
If I were to look inside my head and looked at any particular one neuron, would it be conscious? Would it be me?
Yeah.
No. Would it, even parts of the brain, if I took one out, I'd probably still be part, mostly the same as if it wasn't a very important part. People have had brain injuries and still they seem like the same person from the outside looking in.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to create high bandwidth hive minds. I think there's a lot of different ways we can do that, but my favorite is biologically, because I mean we already have kind of two brains that are bridged by this thing in the center. So can we figure out how to bridge? Can I figure out how to bridge my brain to other people's brains, and what happens if I do? I can't wait to find out. I totally want to see if the colors of the rainbow look the same to everyone. I can't wait to find that out. Do you think it's all a simulation?
A simulation within a simulation, an onion of simulations.
Yeah,
Who knows?
without a basement.
How would you know?
I think we could become like gods and spend 1 billion years exploring the universe and still not know where the basement is. There's some things that might just be unknowable, and we don't even know that we don't know them. It's kind of scary. But I mean, I do want to get past this like silly little like 100-year limitation on how long I can explore and think and be. Yeah, we have Well, intelligence is the most powerful thing in the universe. That and love.
Sorry, that's definitely going in the document. Would you like to expound on that one?
I don't know. It's kind of a useless word, but we relate to it as humans, even if we don't know what it means. Some of us hate it. Some of us hate love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, you should interview me.
You want more coffee?
No, you should interview me when I'm on LSD. But
Have you got any?
No, I don't have any. But it would probably be a much better interview. So, what is transhumanism? So I think it's a name that kind of scares. It's a term that kind of scares people who hear it for the first time, and it probably has some negative priming. I think transhumanism is just what we've been doing for the past 20,000 years anyway. I mean, humans are always trying to do more, trying to better themselves, trying to make life happier, and life in a lot of ways, in terms of physical conveniences, is a heck of a lot happier than it was 100 years ago. And in a sense, you're a transhumanist if you wear glasses or drive a car, or take medicine or do anything to sort of upgrade your natural composition in any way, shape, or form. You're already starting to go down that road. And so we can almost dispense with the term if we don't need it as an organizing concept for what people are doing. It could be a bad thing to have the term, because it could create, it could eventually lead to some really silly polarizations that I don't ever want to see happen. I've heard, at least in the United States, different parts of the political spectrum. Fortunately, I've heard it from both sides. I've heard people with really liberal politics freak out when I talk about transhumanism, and I've heard people with really conservative politics freak out when I talk about transhumanism. So that's kind of good in the sense that there's not a biased response from either side. But there again, the kind of things you hear are all those silly, simplistic objections that you, if you think about them for 10 seconds, you kind of move past them. Resistance to transhumanist ideas is a whole documentary that you could probably make. Especially if you just went out and you talk to random people in the street.
Vox popping, yeah.
Yeah, and you'll hear the same things over and over again, the same sort of knee-jerk reactions to the whole thing. I don't know if the term is necessary. It could be kind of like if somebody hadn't had the brilliant idea to call them embryonic stem cells, if they had just not called them that, stem cell research might have thrived in the United States during that period instead of getting embroiled in controversy. Because there's no reason they needed to call them embryonic stem cells, right? So it might be important what you call things. Really, transhumanism is it's the forefront of humanism, and yeah, it's transcending our current situation, and our current suffering and our current limitations, which is what you do if you want to build a spaceship or anything that involves transcending, going beyond. That's all it is. But maybe there's a particular aggressiveness about people who adopt that term, myself included, where we're trying to make people think differently. And then the term just dissolves at some point if it serves its purpose. I think Max Moore doesn't use, there is no formal extropian movement anymore, because they kind of did what they set out to do in the 80s and 90s, is what I've heard people say is Max's opinion on that. Does that sound right to you? That's
what I've heard. Yeah.
There's no extropian movement. There was an extropian movement, and it served its purpose. And maybe there won't be a transhumanist movement, and it will have served its purpose. Right now, it does seem like it nucleates certain people together. As a philosophical movement, it brought certain people together and caused certain things to happen where there was actual technological progress as a result. So Halcyon Molecular is kind of an example of that, where the connections that were made when the company was funded were through transhumanist networks, were through this way of organizing people, or through this messaging that brought certain people together with an intense devotion to making certain things happen. And so that was useful. And also as an organizing concept, or a way to gather people together, it's probably useful. It's probably useful for AI research, AGI research. Maybe there'll be a critical mass of people brought together to actually do serious cryonics research, which isn't really happening. At least not on any kind of scale of really solving the problem of cryonics. So what is transhumanism? Transhumanism is transhumanism is, I don't know what transhumanism is. No idea. But about the Do You Want to Die poster, when we founded the H Plus Club in Tucson, one of the posters that we put up around campus that I thought would generate a lot of controversy, but we only heard positive things from it. It said in big bold letters, "Do you want to die?" And below that it said, "Neither do we." So the obvious answer is no, you don't want to die. I think if you don't want to die, you're a transhumanist. So, and if you want the freedom to die on your own terms, you're a transhumanist. you might be a transhumanist if. Okay, there's probably a series of like Jeff Foxworthy style jokes there, but I'm not a comedian. So yeah, if you drive a car, you're a transhumanist, but you're not a transhumanist. Like, okay, if we're gonna make the word mean anything, so we had this other term, immortalist, and we had that throughout the 2000s, and a lot of people I knew used that term to describe themselves. This is kind of some of us who I think, okay, so where the philosophical movement is useful is that if I weren't philosophically inclined this way, I wouldn't have seen Aubrey's face on the cover of Technology Review with the description below his very intense gaze that said, Aubrey de Grey, he's brilliant, but is he nuts? And something like, this man wants to defeat death. And I saw that, and I realized, whoa, here's somebody who's respected, who's talking about beating death. And I immediately thought, I'm going to work for that guy. And I went to the conference and I started working on his project like a year later. And so the philosophical seed was there for the cover of MIT Technology Review to act as a signaling mechanism for this random person at University of Arizona to like fly to Cambridge and get to know Aubrey. So I guess that's where the philosophical cohesion of a movement comes in, is that there have been a lot of dynamics like that in the past 5 years that have led to the founding of companies and to actually developing technology in the trenches, and also a vein in transhumanism currently to do stuff. And we've slightly moved beyond the philosophical talking phase into let's actually build these technologies, and more and more people are being drawn into taking action. What is transhumanism?
Mentioned immortalism, where that came
Oh yeah, immortalism. So, in a really watered down way, you could say everyone's an immortalist who doesn't want to die, but we kind of decided we'd save that term, at least among the circle of friends I was involved with who had kind of been nucleated by Aubrey's advocacy. We came together because Aubrey was out there in the world, where we decided we would save the term immortalist for not just people who didn't want to die, but for people who would make it the major priority of their life to intervene in death. So we kind of talk about most people are passive immortalists. If you ask them if they want to die, they don't want to die. If you ask them if they ever don't want to be free to decide to live, they'll say, well, of course, I want to be free to decide whether or not I'm going to live. But they're not doing anything about it, and they won't do anything about it to any extent. They won't lift a finger to do anything about it. Maybe eventually those people will make certain voting decisions, like that's doing something, and make certain choices, but the vast majority of people won't actually take any action toward that goal. And the vast majority of scientists don't see themselves as taking any action toward that goal. So I think we might change the scientific and engineering culture if we're successful. And I think Halcyon might change that with success. Might set an example of setting out on a research project with a purpose instead of science is cool. Science is cool, but so is sitting up on that mountain playing a guitar. Yeah, and I could enjoy both. So immortalism. Okay, so Buddhism. Okay, like my take on transhumanism, immortalism, and Buddhism, in a nutshell, is so we're trying to transcend our physical limitations and determine how long we're going to live, and have expanded brains and expanded capabilities and the freedom to determine our morphology and our physical destiny and the nature of our minds. and to understand everything we can possibly understand and satisfy our curiosity and reverse engineer the universe and have lives of bliss and freedom forever. And what's interesting about that is that kind of maps to the God realm in Buddhism. So you have 5 realms in Buddhism. You have hell, and then above that you have animals, above that you have humans, and then you have demigods, and then you have gods. And what I understand of Buddhist theology is that the only way off of this infinite wheel of suffering is to be a human and to let it all go somehow. And I'm not going to analyze whether or not that's true, because if that's true, then we're definitely in some kind of simulation, whether it's an in silico simulation or something unimaginable. It's some kind of illusion or a game, if that's actually true. But there's some interesting features built up around that theology that kind of speak to our current situation. It's that you can become a god in Buddhist theology. Like, it's accepted in the chain of progression of being that you can transcend death, that you can become all-powerful. But eventually you decay and you get back on the wheel. Maybe you go back down to hell, or maybe you reincarnate on some other level, but inevitably all composite things are subject to decay. And how that relates to the transcendence we're trying to achieve technologically, that kind of whispers in the back of my mind, along with issues about this all being a simulation or an illusion. And I do question the fundamental, the supposedly fundamental drive of my life as a transhumanist, immortalist, extropian, and all those other tags that I put on myself. I do question it, and it's probably really freedom that I want, as opposed to I definitely want to become a god, because I don't know what the basement of the universe is. I don't know what the fundamental truth of the universe is. I want to find out, and I'd like to live long enough to find out, or maybe I'll find out this afternoon. Who knows? But yeah, the mapping of what we're trying to do to that idea of realms in Buddhism is interesting. And I want to get that out there because I haven't heard anyone else relate those two concepts. So, okay, released into meme space. We'll see if anybody reflects upon it.
So the wheel. So I mean, like in terms of like the different levels there, you mentioned like the wheel of life, and that's where like animals and humans exist. So what do you think hell is?
Well, wow, hell would be like what Werner Vinge described as your ego smeared across 1,000,000 death cubes. I mean, if you combine like arbitrary computational magnificence, and you can do anything, or you can program the simulation to do anything to you. I mean, what would the opposite of being a god be like? That's what it would be like. It doesn't sound like very much fun. If there is some kind of somewhat eternal wheel, and we can get off of that wheel 1 in a mole incarnations, or 1 in a Google incarnations, and we can only do it when we're humans, we better do it. Probably. Because if that's true, then we've gone through all this before, and we've become gods before, and we just get kicked off and we come back. And maybe there's truth to that. I mean, I practice meditation for what it's worth. I'm not sure it helps. I'm not sure it's going to get to the truth of that. But I've also played around with enough LSD to like have serious doubts about everything. It's just, even if this is a simulation and our true essence is somehow immortal and free already, it still seems like this is the most interesting time in history. This is like the most interesting game we could have signed up for, to be in this situation with on the verge of eternity somehow. And if I have to choose between I'm going to become enlightened and have this great Kensho moment, and I'm going to extinguish my flame and be free of suffering for all eternity and transcend and become the Buddha rather than a god, yeah, I don't know if I have the courage to do that if godhood is waiting. even if I know that after 100 billion years of godhood, I have to go back on the wheel and go back to hell and start all over. Like I don't know. And then another like mapping any of this to Buddhist theology gets kind of silly quickly, because then you have the bodhisattvas who transcend but then come back and they're like these god beings, and I don't know. I don't know if Buddha knew anything. I'm not even sure Buddha existed. Did Buddha exist? Is that known historically? Was there actually a person?
So I think they're like, oh, okay, just look at Tibet, and that they are the Lama,
Yeah.
the like Dalai Lama, the Panchen Lama. So
Yeah.
they are the like real Buddha. So
Yeah. Well, okay. Hey, we should totally talk to the Dalai Lama about transhumanism. I mean,
If we can get through his wall of henchmen. Now, I mean, I'd love to.
I'm sure you can get an intro. We just got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I've thought of that before.
Yeah.
Having his perspective on transhumanism or the future of science technology. And he has actually touched on these points I've seen on YouTube. He's spoken very briefly about these subjects, and I thought it was really interesting. Now, that guy has a lot of ears listening to him, so if we can sort of get him to sort of express some sort of view on the concept from a Buddhist perspective, I think that would create a small cascade of interested minds.
What if he says that we
Converging on
should?
this
What,
subject.
what if he pushes the non-attachment agenda and we're all supposed to accept death?
Well, I mean, actually, I've seen in an interview, he said if I could have the technology which will help me achieve like longevity, then I would take it.
Really?
I've seen that, yes.
Dalai Lama said
Yeah.
that? Go
Yeah.
Dalai Lama.
I
I
thought
think
that they are like, yeah, I don't know. They actually accept the life cycle thing, so they are supposed to like die one day and then reborn.
But a god's supposed to die?
Yeah, that's the weird thing, is that in
No,
that.
they live in Buddhism. I don't know. I mean, they are supposed to be one god, but they reborn and die, reborn and die. So it's like the phoenix.
Yeah, Phoenix. Yeah,
Phoenix,
yeah.
yes.
Wow. But you can't become enlightened as a god. That's one of the rules. You can only achieve enlightenment as a human. You can't do it as a god. Maybe because as a god, you can't possibly detach yourself from your power and your infinite bliss. You can't get away from it. You can't back off from it and see it as an illusion.
So becoming Buddha is different from becoming God.
Yeah, the Buddha is above the gods because the Buddha is off the wheel. The Buddha is not subject to this eternal
And
cycle.
I think the Chinese god and the Western god is totally different thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm talking variously about the Buddha concept of God, which I'm not that clear on, and the transhumanist use of the term, which maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be really careful about that, at the risk of offending people who are into the Christian uppercase G God.
I have to plug this in just one second.
No,
Continue.
I don't know what to continue with. So, and I've got a few minutes left. Yeah. Do you have a card or like
no.
some way to stay in touch?
Okay.
Right.
I do have a car, so.
Yes, I do. If you'll send me an email, I'd love to hear from you. Where is my card that I'm going to give you? Somewhere deep in my mysterious pocket.
Just plugged in, sorry.
Looks like I'm all out of our historic business cards. I've gotta get some more printed up. But
You have it?
send me an email. Let's see. So I'm gonna run in a minute here, literally.
Are you going to disappear?
I'm not going to disappear, but I'm going to go talk to these gentlemen who are interested in Halcyon,
Yeah, sure.
kind of
Please
slightly
do.
in selling mode. So
Mm.
as opposed to discoursing on philosophy mode,
Okay. Well,
which I'm happy
we can
to
always
do.
come back later and do some maybe. At what time are you going to be here until?
Until I'll talk to them until they get bored. So at least 4 probably. They'll probably be able to stand me until 4. We'll see.
Okay.
So what's your email address?
So if you type it in there and then send it, that'll go to me and it'll go to you and it'll have my email address. So just type your email address. Nobody knows what the singularity is. One of the most useful definitions of it, though, or something that gives us something to wrap our heads around, is that the singularity is the point at which technology becomes totally unpredictable. It becomes advanced enough that we don't know what's going to happen. And it could be that when we hit the singularity, and it's not even clear whether the singularity could happen in a day or the singularity will happen across 10 years or across a century. It's not clear. That when we hit it, we kind of fall off this cliff of being able to predict what happens next. Some things that are kind of covered by that concept of the singularity are
It's good background knowledge, but it's just like
that we
no real school background, and then suddenly
probably just within a domain that's limited to what humans care about, we know everything.
Not good compared to everyone.
When we reach that point. Not that we're going to not that it's not going to take billions of years to really hack the universe, but that when we fall off that cliff, to the extent that humans are interested in knowledge and satisfying their curiosity, that at that point kind of all secrets are revealed. At least secrets in the sense that we can imagine them now. None of this might be true. This could be completely misframed. It's probably also a terrible introduction to the singularity for a layperson who's never heard the term. A more functional definition that AI researchers are into is that the singularity is triggered when you have an intelligence that can modify itself, and that's I.J. Good's concept of the intelligence explosion that goes back a long way. If I can make myself smarter, then the smarter me can also make itself smarter, and so on and so forth recursively until I'm smarter than the universe.
The problem is we've got people speaking directly behind you.
Yeah,
Which
well
means-
that's good because I don't think this is very good content.
We'll just wait till they finish. And then,
Well, okay, so
because this is the directional mic.
hi, it's the directional mic. Hello, directional mic. My name's Kent. So another stab at what is the? Are you asking everybody what the singularity is, and you're going to have a?
And that's one of the problems. I have been asking basic concepts. I've just been asking, I'm assuming people know what that means, and assuming everybody agrees on what it is, but actually people don't, and people. So yeah, I'll just I'll just wait till I finish. I think.
How do you define it?
I like I.J. Good's version the best. I don't think it's got anything to do with accelerating technology, although that's an indicator that it might happen. But the singularity isn't. The indicators that it will happen is actually the singularity. Is like you just said it before, the ability of a mind to recreate itself or improve itself. And it looks like it's going to be in an artificial intelligence. It's from our point of view, it's a singularity because we can't see what an intelligence far greater than us might do, and it might happen in a time scale that we cannot understand. So from the outside looking in, we can't see it. We can't see what's beyond there. Who knows what happens afterwards? But that Vernor Vinge does go into. That's what a singularity is, because you don't know what's beyond. But I think the version which I'm closest to is more succinct. It's intelligence explosion. It's just purely and intelligence being able to create better intelligence or improve itself, and therefore have more power or more intelligence to take it to the next stage and the next stage, and there we go.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, what if we just call that an intelligence explosion, and we let the term singularity remain vague and kind of like this far off thing that we're trying to achieve? But then, if we only frame it in positive terms and say that it's this far off golden future that we're trying to achieve, then we need to remember that it could be a very bad thing. We could also pull a sleight of hand and just decide that maybe there's a definition. Maybe we should define it differently. Maybe we should define it differently. Maybe we should define it as, in terms of what humans can comprehend, it's the point where there's no material scarcity. So there's no more fighting over resources, material resources at least. We can spend all eternity fighting over conceptual and abstract resources. I'm kind of okay with that. That'll keep things interesting. And also where we're not subject to pre-programmed suffering. We're not subject to biological predestination. Maybe if we just define it that way, it's kind of positive in terms of a goal for mankind. With both of those things, though, at the end of material scarcity and curing all diseases, there's a flip side to both of those concepts that's really negative. So, if we have that much control over the physical universe, some very bad things could be done. So, yeah, people can be scary. I think Aubrey has already demonstrably been useful to advancing technology because of the people who saw that beard and came together because of him. He nucleated a lot of things. There are 2 or 3 companies I know of that wouldn't exist if people hadn't been brought together because of Aubrey. So it served a purpose. He's kind of I think he's kind of martyred at this point to hyper advocacy and having to say the same goddamn things over and over again to the same ignorant knee-jerk questions over and over again. I really feel for him having to do that. I don't know like how many times I've been in a room where Aubrey's giving a talk with a significant number of lay people there, people who've never heard him before, and I just wince when inevitably somebody comes up with the overpopulation question. It's like, here we go again. And Aubrey's probably said the same thing 10,000 times in response to that.
What do you think people? What questions do you think people need to be asking or haven't asked before that somebody like Aubrey would be a good mouthpiece to answer?
I think I read Aubrey had a standing offer to any journalist, like a bet if you ask me a question I haven't heard before. He said that in some interview, like $5 if you can ask me a question, or I'll buy you a beer if you can ask me a question I haven't had from a journalist before. Wow, has everything been asked?
Every useful question.
Every useful question. How does John Q. Public contribute? Okay, well, John Q. Public contributes by voting. How does like John Q. College student contribute? Maybe they drop out of college and start working directly on things that matter, or maybe if they're becoming a scientist, they insist on really understanding the long-term purpose of whatever research they're assigned when they start their apprenticeship in the world of science, and that there's a long-term thinking component and it's consequentialist. What the ultimate, how what they are going to work on will fundamentally affect mankind. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is the first recorded story, and it's about a guy trying to achieve immortality. It's like 8,000 years old, some huge number of years old. King Gilgamesh has everything, kind of like the Buddha had everything. He was going to have the world in front of him. He was going to be the emperor of the world. Gilgamesh was the emperor. He was all powerful within a human realm, and he was not just all powerful. He was like the paragon of masculine excellence. He was like 7 foot tall and had a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he had bested innumerable enemies in combat and had like a stable of 20 trillion incredibly hot women servicing him all the time, or whatever. And he had this. Actually, like there's a really interesting pornographic component to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where he has like this massive orgy by a river, or he spends like 5 days having sex with this woman, and it's a lot of fun. But anyway, he's not content because he's going to die, so he sets off on this quest to achieve immortality, and that's what it's about. And it's like the oldest story. It is the oldest recorded narrative of any kind in human history. And that's what it's about. So there's something to that.